It was announced last month that Stitch's Great Escape would be closing. Let's take a moment of silence to remember it for the fantastic attraction that it was. What? No, nobody liked it. Nobody. Okay, so in that case, let's take a moment of silence for the ride that came before it, ExtraTERRORestrial Alien Encounter. In fact, let's talk a little bit about its history. So, ExtraTERRORestrial Alien Encounter opened in the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World in 1995, but its history goes way further back than that. In fact, it goes back almost a decade earlier to the mid-1980s when Michael Eisner and Frank Wells took over the Disney company and started to make a lot of changes. One of the big changes that Eisner wanted to make to the parks is to make it more appealing to teenagers. He had a teenage son at the time, Breck Eisner, who thought Disney was pretty lame and boring, and Michael Eisner was kind of afraid that that's what all teenagers thought of Disney World, and so it was very important for him to try and make the parks a little more appealing to teenagers. Now, some of you might go, how could you possibly think that Disney is boring for teenagers? But you got to remember, this was an era before things like Splash Mountain or Expedition Everest or Mission Space or Test Track or all the rides that probably came from this idea of making the parks a little more friendly for teenagers. And so one of the things they wanted to work on was a scary, thrilling ride about aliens in the Magic Kingdom. Now, the original premise for the attraction that Walt Disney Imagineering put together was called Nostromo. Now, if that sounds familiar, that's because it is the name of the ship from the horror sci-fi film Alien. And the premise of this attraction was that you were going to be on the ship, the Nostromo, from the movie, and at that time the crew would be in the middle of being terrorized by the xenomorph alien, the famous scary alien from the movie. You would be in an armored vehicle that is mounted with laser cannons, and you would be going around saving the crew of the Nostromo while fighting off the alien with your laser blaster, and then you would all escape and it would be happily ever after. This was planned towards the end of the 80s, but it eventually got scrapped. Some of the older folks over at Walt Disney Imagineering didn't like the idea of it. It felt very un-Disney to them. It was a combination of the fact that it was a horror attraction, it was based on an R-rated movie, and that you had an attraction where people had guns and were shooting at aliens. It just seemed very un-Disney-like. Now, of course, no good idea dies over at Disney World, and so if you can think about it, Tomorrowland eventually did get its attraction in which you're in an armored vehicle with a laser gun shooting at aliens. But during their research of putting this together, they found that they still wanted to use the alien in some capacity. It was a popular franchise, people recognized the xenomorph, and that's why eventually you saw them license out the alien from 20th Century Fox for use in the Great Movie Ride in, at the time, what was called MGM Studios, now Hollywood Studios. So fast forward a couple of years, and Walt Disney Imagineering is now trying to think of something to do with Mission to Mars, an attraction both in Disney World and Disneyland that started to become a little bit outdated. This was something that opened back in the mid-70s. Now we're talking about the late 80s. They wanted to do something with it, and so they revisited this alien idea, and Walt Disney Imagineering worked up this concept for another ride based on Alien, the movie franchise, that took place in the building. And the premise was essentially what you knew ExtraTERROrestrial Alien Encounter to be, which is the idea is you went into the circular theater and it used all of these effects, mostly in darkness, to make it seem like this alien had broken loose and that it was terrorizing all the people in the theater. Now, they thought Alien was a perfect match for this. Everybody knew what the xenomorph looked like. They knew how horrible it was. So from a ride perspective, there wasn't a whole lot that they had to explain to the audience. On top of that, a lot of the effects used in the attraction, while they were really effective in getting the idea across and creating this element of horror, they weren't very expensive to produce. They weren't very cutting edge. And so you had this double whammy of this potentially really popular ride based on a really popular franchise that was also extremely cheap to create. And because it was using a lot of effects in this format of this round theater, there wasn't going to be a whole lot of structural work that needed to be done to the building for Mission to Mars. Eisner loved the idea and he wanted them to go forward with it, but again, some of the older folks at Walt Disney Imagineering did not like the concept. They thought the idea of a ride that horrifying in the Magic Kingdom just didn't fit. It just didn't seem right for Disney. So this is where story sort of becomes myth and legend and things aren't particularly clear what happened. But the story goes that some of these older folks at Walt Disney Imagineering, they made their argument to Michael Eisner, who sided with this team working on this alien ride. And so they instead decided to go ahead and talk to George Lucas. But Rob, why would they go to George Lucas? What does he have to do with Disney? Well, at the time, George Lucas was working with Disney. They had worked on Star Tours, which was wildly successful. They were working on this Indiana Jones stunt show. And so he was working closely with Disney at the time. And so it made sense for them to turn to him. Nobody knows what was said to George Lucas or what he had promised, but he supposedly said he would talk to Michael Eisner. And what we do know is that a couple of days later, Michael Eisner went back to Walt Disney Imagineering, having had a sudden change of heart, and he decided that they needed to drop the Alien franchise from the attraction and rework it. Oh, and P.S., the new executive producer on the attraction was going to be George Lucas. So we could sort of put together what must have happened, but nobody really knows for sure. The Imagineering team who was putting together the ride wasn't really sure what to do. They didn't really love this idea. Suddenly, this alien that everybody knew and was familiar with was not going to be able to be put into the ride. And so they had to come up with a story that people could relate to. So they eventually came up with a story that you see today. That said, the attraction that a lot of you might know and love and remember wasn't the original plan when they had to remove Alien from it. The story goes that George Lucas's original concept was a lot darker than that. So in the actual attraction, if you've never ridden it, the premise is that XS Tech is in Tomorrowland previewing this new teleportation technology. And so the idea is they were going to teleport this cute and cuddly animal or alien from one place to another, and during some sort of technical mix-up, what they end up teleporting into your little stage area is this terrifying alien that they eventually get rid of. The original plot was actually a lot darker than that, and this is the plot that supposedly came from George Lucas. In the original plot of Extraterrestrial Alien Encounter, the premise was that that terrifying alien was going to be put there on purpose. You see, XS Tech wasn't actually showing off this teleportation technology. They were testing the effects of these lethal aliens on human beings, and you were the guinea pig. And you didn't know at first, but over the course of the ride, it would become clear that you were actually supposed to be exposed to this horrible alien. And in fact, part of that plot includes a point in which the alien turns out to not be evil at all, turns out to be sentient and just wants to get out of there and go home. And when the XS Tech technicians find this out, their plan is to get rid of all the evidence of this and in the process kill the alien and everybody in the theater. However, the alien finds a way to unlock the controls to the seats so that you can escape and get out of there, and on your way out you hear the alien sort of wreaking havoc on the technicians who are left behind. Obviously, that idea was scrapped. That is not what Extraterrestrial Alien Encounter became, but it did indeed become this ride that everybody knew and loved. So the ride was soft opened in 1994, and very quickly Imagineering learned that they had to make a lot of changes to the ride. They found that the ride was so scary and people were screaming so much and for so long that a lot of very important lines of exposition were not being heard by most guests. On top of that, there were a lot of details. They didn't understand how the alien was moving around the space so quickly because you didn't get to see it as much. And so what they ended up doing was spending a period of about 6 months reworking the ride, trying to retime everything so that it worked better with the crowd, so there was a little bit more exposition. And as the story goes, over the course of those 6 months, Michael Eisner sort of fell out of love with the attraction. You see, he was really into the ride at first, and he tested it along with the soft opening crowd, and towards the end, he just didn't seem to care for it much. Now, why? Nobody really knows for sure. Some people speculate that it was because this extra 6 months of tinkering bloated up the budget another $10 to $15 million. Some people say that he finally saw firsthand that the Imagineers were right and that this attraction just didn't really fit with Tomorrowland. In any case, for as loved as it was closed 8 years later in 2003 and replaced with Stitch's Great Escape, which used a lot of the same mechanics of the attraction, but of course took out the horror element and made it more comedic by replacing the terrifying alien with the cute cuddly Stitch. And now with Stitch closing, we look forward to a new attraction. And just as a testament to how loved Extraterrestrial Alien Encounter was, you have people this month just clamoring for them to bring it back. That probably won't be the case, but it's always good to know that this short-lived ride had a lot of fans. I want to thank you all for watching. If you would like to see more Disney videos and the history of Disney rides and the parks in general, all you have to do is hit that subscribe button. I make 3 videos a week. If you want more Disney content beyond that, I do a Disney podcast weekly with my friend Christine. It's called the Tomorrowland Transit Authorities. You can find it on Google Play, you can find it on iTunes, or on our website, ttapodcast.com. Whatever you're doing, make the most of it, and I'll see you next time for the next Did You Know Disney? Bye, everybody. Walt Disney had decided to move forward with his plans of an East Coast Disneyland that would also be the home of a futuristic city called Epcot. However, he also knew that because Disney was such a popular name that if he did so publicly, the cost of the land would be so high that he wouldn't be able to buy as much as he wanted.